Dispatch to Unit 4. Individual entered precinct voluntarily. Name unknown. Claims he's being followed. Says he doesn't feel safe. But the facial recognition flagged him. He matches one of ours. Top tier. Most wanted. Advise caution.
He walked in just after 10:41 p.m., soaked from the rain. No jacket, no ID, and with a tremor in his voice that didn't match his eyes. "I need help," he said. "Someone's following me." The officer at the front desk blinked twice, unsure whether he was dealing with a drunk, a schizophrenic, or just another lost soul off the street. But there was something unsettling in how calm he stood, like his fear wasn't imagined, but memorized. "Take a seat," the officer said, and buzzed the inner door. The man nodded, grateful, but never turned his back to the entrance. He sat perfectly still, eyes on the glass, like he expected someone to burst in at any moment. His fingers drummed an uneven rhythm on the metal chair, and he flinched every time the intercom crackled. When they ran his face through the system, standard for unidentifiable individuals, the air in the control room changed. It took less than 3 seconds for the alert to hit. Match found. Red code. The system pulled up a profile from the national database. Name, unknown. Alias, several. Charges, multiple. Status, most wanted. And the photo was him. Not someone who looked like him. Not a distant cousin. The exact same face, same scar above the eyebrow, same deep shadowed eyes. Detective Mara Lynn was already en route from another case, but the captain ordered a soft lockdown. "Keep him seated. No alarms, no sudden moves." In the meantime, Officer Ramirez sat across from the man and asked again, "Who did you say was following you?" The man didn't answer at first. He simply looked at Ramirez, voice steady. "You won't believe me, but I think it's me." Ramirez tried to ignore the chill crawling up his spine. This wasn't the first bizarre story he'd heard inside these walls. People claiming to be from alternate realities, survivors of secret cults, even clones. But something about this man's voice cut through the usual noise. He didn't smell like alcohol. There were no signs of drugs on his clothes. His eyes were clear, sharp, terrifyingly lucid. Ramirez slid a bottle of water across the table, trying to keep the man talking while waiting for upper command to respond. "You got a name, man?" The stranger hesitated. "Depends. Which one of mine do you want?" Ramirez gave a nervous chuckle. "Let's start with your real one." The man looked down, then slowly turned his eyes toward the wall behind Ramirez and froze. There it was. The department's most wanted wall, 10 faces. His was the 4th. "That's me," he whispered, "but I didn't do any of that." Ramirez stiffened. He turned and studied the photograph. Same jawline, same scar, same hardened expression. But the eyes, this man's eyes, held something else. "You're telling me someone out there has your face, is committing crimes, and now you're the one being hunted?" The man nodded. "And he knows I know." Ramirez checked the system log again. The crime dates matched the same days this man claimed to be in the hospital, records that supposedly existed, but now, nothing. Missing. Deleted. A long silence settled. Ramirez had dealt with his fair share of liars, but this wasn't madness. It felt like the beginning of something much bigger, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to know where it would lead. Captain Drew Harland arrived 15 minutes later, wearing a pressed shirt and a face that hadn't slept in 2 days. He stepped into the interrogation room, reviewed the feed from the adjacent monitor, and didn't say a word for a full minute. Then he walked in and closed the door. Ramirez briefed him with quiet urgency. Harland watched the man carefully, his eyes narrowing. "Where did you see your face? Be specific." The man didn't hesitate. "On the wall in the lobby, most wanted, case 204B. Harland's lips tightened. That case was sealed. No one outside internal affairs should have even known it existed. You remember anything about the crimes you're supposedly tied to? Harland asked. The man nodded slowly. Some flashes, but they're not mine. They come like dreams someone else left in my head. Harland folded his arms. And you walked in here asking for help? Most guys in your position would have run. I've been running, the man said. It hasn't helped. Harland turned to Ramirez and ordered him to cross-reference the fingerprints immediately. The machine beeped twice, then froze. The match came back red, identity confirmed, but next to it, an alert, subject, deceased, date of death, August 17, 2006. Harland didn't flinch. You died 19 years ago, he said, staring at the man. Apparently, the man replied. But I'm sitting here. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Ramirez looked like he'd seen a ghost. Harland didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in things that didn't belong in police databases, things that got buried for a reason. Harland reached for the phone, then stopped. Whoever this man was, dead or alive, someone had gone to great lengths to erase him, and now he was back, which meant someone, somewhere, would come looking to fix that. Detective Harland didn't sleep that night. Instead, he locked the man in holding cell 4B, a cell reserved for high-risk detainees, and turned off the internal logs. No one else on duty even knew the man was in custody. The less anyone knew, the safer they'd all be. Harland sat in his office with a single desk lamp burning, staring at the redacted file from case 204B. The file had been sealed under federal order, the kind that came without signatures. But now, the man from that forgotten case was breathing, sitting 2 floors below. Harland lit a cigarette with trembling hands. The report stated the suspect was presumed dead after a shootout in a warehouse fire, body unidentifiable, case closed. No funeral, no follow-up, just silence. And now this man had walked in asking for help, haunted by memories that didn't feel like his. Harland thought back to his rookie days, the unsolved disappearances, the strange phone calls at night. It was always the same pattern. Someone came too close to something hidden, and they vanished. Harland remembered one particular case where a woman had described being followed by men who didn't blink. She disappeared the next day. Now here was this man, with an ID tied to a case that never should have resurfaced, and fingerprints that screamed he wasn't supposed to be breathing. Harland opened a locked drawer and pulled out an old Polaroid. The man's face, nearly identical, was in that photo too. But that photo was dated 1995, and the man hadn't aged. Harland felt the cold bloom in his spine. Something was wrong. Not criminally wrong, cosmically wrong. He whispered to himself, "What did they do to you?" And deep inside, he already knew. This wasn't about a man being alive. It was about something refusing to stay buried. Back in cell 4B, the man sat motionless on the cold metal bench, staring at the floor as if something beneath it whispered his name. The fluorescent light above flickered every few seconds, casting brief shadows that crawled up the walls and died in silence. His hands trembled, but not from fear. It was something else. A pull. A magnetism. Like his body was rejecting the room, the world, even his own skin. He clenched his fists and dug his nails into his palms until it hurt, just to remember he was real. He didn't know his name, didn't know where he lived, but he knew codes, numbers, patterns. He muttered them unconsciously. 1229, Sector 4, Operative Delta, Reset. The words meant nothing to him, yet they poured from his mouth with the precision of a soldier reciting orders. He touched the list of names again, crumpled and damp in his coat pocket. 10 names, all written in the same blocky handwriting, all unfamiliar. Yet when he closed his eyes, each name exploded in his mind like a memory trying to claw its way back. Faces, places, screams. He gasped and slammed his back against the wall. Somewhere inside, something was waking up, something that wasn't supposed to be conscious anymore. Then came the sound. Soft, low, and mechanical, a faint buzz from the cell's overhead vent. He looked up and froze. That wasn't just air. That was surveillance, monitoring, the kind that didn't belong to the station. His body moved before his mind did. He tore the vent grill loose and shoved the list of names deep inside, behind the wiring. Just in case he forgot again. He sat down slowly, heartbeat rising, eyes now locked on the corner camera. "They're already coming," he whispered. "They know I broke the loop." Detective Miles Kenner returned to the cell, with a fresh cup of coffee in hand, but his eyes were sharp now, no longer casual, no longer curious. He had spent the last 20 minutes reviewing a different database, one not connected to any public system. What he found didn't clarify things. It made them worse. The man in the cell didn't exist. No birth certificate, no criminal record, no social security number. Not even a fingerprint match. Not locally, not federally. And yet, there were fragments. Broken files, redacted entries, corrupted photos dated back to 1999. One image showed what appeared to be the same man, standing in front of a burning van, expression vacant. Another, a hospital record from a place that didn't exist anymore. And finally, a project name, Echo 9. Miles didn't understand what he was looking at. Government black ops, psychological experiments. None of it made sense, but one thing became clear. This man wasn't a civilian. He was part of something buried so deep even the system itself tried to forget. When Miles stepped into the cell again, the atmosphere had shifted. The man no longer looked lost. He looked aware, alert, as if pieces were falling back into place. "You've seen the files," the man said before Miles could speak. His voice was steady now, eyes locked like a rifle scope. "That's why they'll come for you too." Miles froze mid-step. "Who are they?" The man smiled faintly, not with warmth, but with grim recognition. "The ones who made me, the ones who thought deleting me would be enough." A long silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of static crackling faintly in the radio on Miles's belt. "Tell me everything," the detective said quietly. The man nodded once. "Then we'll have to start from the fire." The fire he spoke of wasn't metaphorical. It was real. February 3rd, 1999, an unregistered facility on the outskirts of Hillsbury caught fire just after midnight. Local reports described it as an abandoned military warehouse, but aerial. Images showed a fence line with security-grade wiring and watchtowers that didn't match the town's budget. The blaze burned for 7 hours. Officially, no one was inside. But Miles had found something different in the archived fire department reports. A single note scribbled hastily in the margin of a scanned log. Body found, but gone before coroner arrived. No ID. It was dismissed, buried, forgotten. Until now. The man, who still hadn't given a name, began recounting the night as if unlocking a door he wasn't supposed to enter again. He remembered smoke thick enough to choke thought, alarms that never stopped, and walls lined with cages, not bars, glass. One of them, he said, held him. "They ran tests," he muttered, voice flat. "Isolation drills, memory fragmentation. They said they were building resilience, but it felt like erasure." Miles leaned in. "Who were they?" The man's mouth tightened. "Doctors. But not the white coat kind. They wore insignias. I never learned their names. We weren't supposed to remember." The detective scribbled every word, but doubt gnawed at the edge of his logic. It sounded too outlandish, too cinematic. And yet, this man knew about a fire that no one should remember. He had details that weren't public. And his face, as wild as it sounded, matched a blurry figure in that 1999 photo. "Why come forward now?" Miles asked. The man paused. "Because something's coming back. And I'm not the only one they let go." His voice dropped lower. Some of us weren't supposed to survive the program. Detective Kenner sat back, the silence between them swelling like a second presence in the room. He had heard liars. He had heard addicts, fantasists, men trying to create meaning out of broken lives. But this wasn't that. The man didn't speak to convince. He spoke as though every word cost him something. Miles reopened the file with the fire report. One line had always bothered him. Interior walls coated in metallic residue, likely synthetic insulation. It was a strange detail, too specific, yet useless, until the man mentioned the walls being mirrored. So, you couldn't even see yourself when you screamed. The detective's pulse picked up. Still, none of this explained why he was on the most wanted list. Why your face? Why now? Miles asked. The man exhaled slowly, looking toward the ceiling, as if the answer might be written in the water stains above. Because I left with something, he whispered. Something they thought burned. Miles waited, breath held. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a torn scrap of fabric, faded, charred, etched faintly with a logo, not military, not corporate, something stranger, a triangle inside a circle with one line severed. Kenner didn't recognize it, but his stomach turned anyway, the kind of symbol that doesn't belong in any system you know, but demands belief. The man held it carefully, like it might vanish. They marked us for tracking, but I removed it, burned the skin to do it. That's why they think I died. The weight in the room was no longer metaphor. Miles couldn't tell if he was chasing a story or being pulled into it. Either way, this wasn't a regular case, and the man across from him wasn't just a suspect. He was a loose end from a chapter no one had permission to read. Detective Kenner stared at the scrap of fabric, the edges blackened, the symbol burned into its weave like a brand from another language. He'd seen plenty of strange things in his years, but nothing like this. It wasn't just the object itself, it was the way the man held it. Reverently, like it still pulsed with heat. "They'll come looking for this," the man said. "And for me." Kenner narrowed his eyes. "And now you've come to me, dragging it back into the light?" The man looked down, exhausted. "I thought I could disappear, let it rot with the ashes. But I started seeing faces again. Not theirs, mine. In papers, on walls, cameras." He paused. "Your system labeled me, didn't it?" Kenner didn't answer, but the file on his desk did. Facial recognition match, 98.7%. Most. Wanted list. Domestic terrorism, sabotage, manslaughter. It made no sense. There was no arrest history, no priors, just that one ghostly entry. A composite that now had a living match sitting in front of him. "What were you part of?" Kenner asked. "Was this a cult? A covert program?" The man shook his head. "It was supposed to be a cure, for forgetting, for pain, for death." His voice trembled. "But we became the experiment. When one of us escaped, everything collapsed." He looked Kenner dead in the eye. "They never meant for any of us to leave." A silence followed, one that felt like a door slowly creaking open between dimensions, past and present, fiction and evidence. Detective Kenner didn't know what scared him more. The possibility this man was delusional, or the possibility he wasn't. And as he looked back at the symbol again, he realized something worse. He had seen it once before, on a burned photograph, long sealed in, a box labeled "Do Not Reinvestigate." Detective Kenner returned home that night with the photograph in his coat pocket, and the unease lodged deeper than any bullet wound he'd ever taken. He didn't sleep. Instead, he opened the locked drawer in his study, the one he hadn't touched since his father's funeral. Inside were documents, letters, and a single manila folder marked with 3 red lines. It wasn't police issue. He didn't even remember filing it. But his name was on the cover in typewriter ink. and when he opened it, the first page punched him harder than any suspect ever had. It was a memo, dated March 3, 1997. Subject: Line: Preliminary Cognitive Wipe Test Subjects, Phase 0. Beneath it, a list of names. His father's, his own, and one more, the man from the station. No alias. Just a single name, typed in all caps: Isaac. Kenner's hands began to tremble. The pieces he'd kept hidden in mental vaults started cracking open like old bones unearthed. The dreams he'd had as a child, endless white rooms, metallic, voices, and people with stitched eyes. They weren't dreams. They were echoes. Isaac had called it the cure. Kenner remembered now. The white door, the injection, the order not to speak. But why had he been spared? Why had his memories only returned now, and most terrifying, who else remembered? As the wind rattled the windows and the city lights flickered beyond his blinds, Kenner realized he'd never been the detective in this story. He was the evidence, rewritten, reintegrated, forgotten, until now. In that moment, the phone rang. No caller ID, just a heavy breath when he answered, then a whisper, one word: run. The line went dead, and so did the lights in his apartment, one by one, as if someone knew exactly where he stood. Kenner grabbed his gun from the drawer, but the weight in his hand felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. The apartment had gone completely silent, save for the buzz of the dead phone line still humming like a warning in the dark. He moved cautiously, each footstep pressing into the creaking wooden floorboards that had never betrayed him before, until now. When he reached the window, he didn't expect to see the man, but there he was. Across the street, under the broken street lamp, a figure in a long coat stood perfectly still, arms behind his back. Isaac, or someone wearing his face. He didn't wave, didn't blink, just stared up at Kenner's window with an intensity that made the detective step back on instinct. When Kenner looked again, he was gone. That's when he noticed the envelope on the floor, slid under the front door without a sound. Inside, another photograph. This time, it was a picture of Kenner himself, but not the version he knew. This one was younger, hair buzzed short, wearing a military-style uniform with no insignia. Behind him stood rows of others, just like him. A number was scribbled across the bottom, 117B, the case number, but not one he had opened, one he had been inside. The implications settled like frost in his lungs. He was part of a program, possibly even its byproduct. If Isaac was telling the truth, then Kenner's identity, his life, his entire narrative might have been a fabrication layered over something darker. A project, a weapon, an experiment gone rogue. And now that he was remembering, they were coming to erase the glitch again. But this time, he wasn't going quietly. He put the photo in his pocket, loaded his gun, and opened the door into the darkness waiting just beyond. Kenner didn't run. He walked into the street like a man who had nothing left to lose, because maybe he never truly had anything to begin with. The night swallowed him, thick with a silence that pressed on his ears like water. The buildings around him no longer felt familiar. Even the air seemed coded, like a simulation glitching just enough to reveal the wires underneath. He turned corners without thinking, but they all led to the same place. The old train depot, long shut down, yet always humming with something unsaid. And there, at the center of the platform, stood Isaac, waiting like it had been scripted. Kenner raised his gun, hand steady, voice sharper than memory. "Why me?" he demanded. Isaac didn't flinch. "Because you asked. You asked to forget. You asked for peace. You begged us to erase everything." Kenner laughed, bitter and broken. "Then why show me again?" Isaac stepped forward. "Because someone has to remember. And if you do, they can't control it anymore." He held out another photo. This time, Kenner saw himself holding a clipboard, giving orders, standing next to a steel room marked only by a number, 117B. Beneath the image, in shaky handwriting, read one sentence: "He volunteered." That sentence burned deeper than any wound he had carried. This wasn't just about being used. It was about choosing to be used, and then burying the choice so deep it became someone else's story. Kenner lowered the gun. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a detective. He felt like a ghost, finally seeing his own grave. Isaac nodded slowly, stepping back into the shadows. "They'll be here soon," he said. "If you run, they'll find you. But if you remember, maybe you'll stop being theirs." The choice was his now. The next morning, Detective Miles Kenner walked into the station and placed his badge on the desk without a word. No one stopped him. No one even looked up. It was as if he had become background noise in a place where he once commanded attention. He glanced around at the other officers, all too busy typing reports, sipping cheap coffee, and complaining about paperwork, to notice the man who had once solved their hardest cases now vanishing in plain sight. Kenner moved past the bulletin board that held the most wanted list, and for a second, he saw his own face. But when he blinked, it was gone. Just a smudge of dust where his eyes had been. He kept walking, through hallways that narrowed with every step, until he reached the evidence room. It wasn't supposed to be open, but the door creaked with a soft breath and welcomed him in. Inside, rows of tagged bags lined the walls, each holding a fragment of a case no one wanted to touch again. And there, on the second shelf, filed, under no name, no code, no date, was the envelope. Kenner picked it up with both hands, like lifting an old wound. It was sealed, no label, no instruction, just the weight of forgotten decisions. He tore it open. Inside were photos, dozens of them, his hands in gloves, his voice on a recorder, a room with no windows, and victims, faces blurred, screams muted, but unmistakably real. He dropped the photos. They scattered like dead birds across the floor, but one stuck to his boot, a mirror, not metaphorical, an actual mirror taken from the interrogation room. And on its surface, in thick black ink, were the words, "If they don't see you, they can't stop you. But if you see yourself, it's already too late." He stood frozen, eyes locked on the message, breath shallow like the air had turned too thick to inhale. The mirror trembled in his grip, not from fear, but from recognition. These weren't just remnants of an old case. These were artifacts from a life he couldn't remember living. Or worse, had deliberately erased. In the silence of the evidence room, he heard it again. That same voice from the interrogation tape. Calm, familiar, repeating the phrase like a ghost trapped in rewind. Tell them what they want to hear. It wasn't Isaac's voice. It was his own, younger, colder, stripped of empathy. Kenner stumbled back. His shoulder hit a metal shelf, knocking down a row of boxes. One spilled open, revealing a dusty file labeled 117B. His eyes widened. He knew that number. He'd filed it himself. A case with no suspect, no body, just a blood-stained watch and a name. Isaac Doyle, the man who claimed he'd seen the victim alive after the murder. The man who knew too much. Kenner crouched down and flipped through the pages. And there. It was, in his own handwriting, a note scribbled hastily. Memory gaps confirmed. Possible asset compromised. Proceed with protocol. Beneath it, a list of initials. Everyone crossed out. Except the last, MK. His hands shook harder, not out of fear, but clarity. This wasn't about Isaac. It never had been. The erasure, the looping confessions, the shifting timelines, they were all part of a test, or a punishment. He looked again at the mirror. This time his reflection didn't match his face. The man staring back was younger, harder, and smiling. A smile that didn't belong to the man holding it. Kenner dropped the mirror. It shattered. But in the shards, the same message remained, etched into every piece. It's already too late. 3 weeks later, an unmarked body was recovered from a drainage canal 20 miles outside the city. Male, early 40s, no face, no hands, no ID. The coroner's report listed him as unidentified, but Detective Kenner never showed up to claim the file. In fact, he never returned at all. His apartment remained untouched. Car parked outside. His badge left neatly on his kitchen table, beside a single envelope. Inside was the ID card Isaac had shown him, now burned around the edges, and a second card, Kenner's own, attached with a paperclip and a typed note. There was no victim. There was no witness. There was only the memory. The precinct opened an internal investigation. Cameras showed Kenner walking into evidence lockup the night he vanished, but not leaving. The footage after 2:17 a.m. was corrupted, scrambled like static, except for one frame that briefly flickered before the blackout. It showed a man sitting in the interrogation room. Not Kenner, not Isaac, but someone else entirely. Wearing Kenner's suit, smiling. The report was quietly closed and sealed under Case 117B. Official cause of disappearance, unknown. And the wall of most wanted suspects? The one Isaac once claimed he saw his own face on? It's still there. Except now, one space remains empty. Its label torn off, glass cracked down the center. Officers pass it without noticing. But sometimes, rarely, a rookie will pause, stare at the empty frame, and swear they saw a face for just a second. And each time, they describe the same detail, the same smile, the same voice, echoing faintly from the walls. Tell them what they want to hear. So, the question remains, was Isaac ever real? Or just the last memory Kenner had left to forget?